folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Chris, fresh back from my recent trip to the United Kingdom, less than 48 hours, which, of course, was shortly on the heels after my recent trip to South Africa in January, last week, January, and all of February I spent in South Africa. My guest today is none other than, well, some of you may remember her as Rene Kruger, but, of course, she is now Rene van der Vyver, and hopefully I pronounced that correctly, Rene. Did I get that correct?
Yes, I just unmuted myself, but yes, you got that correctly. Thank you, Chris.
Excellent. No, it's a pleasure to have you back once again. You know, each time I try to get you on the program, and I don't pester you very often, but I try to get you on periodically. Each time I get you on, you're always like, well, but Chris, what will I talk about? What do you want me to talk about? Listen, Rene, there's so much to talk about when it comes to Afrikaans and Afrikaans culture and the Afrikaner people and South Africa in general. And not just that, but I mean, also people are interested in your experiences, the things that you don't mind sharing with the public. And so, you know, there you go. There's always something to talk about. Very soon I'll have Skulk Burger will be on the program. We're going to be talking about Afrikaans language and history and culture. Hopefully next week. We've had to postpone that because he was busy. I was busy. I was traveling. He was traveling. You know how it goes. So he'll be on the program hopefully next week. But I want to get you on today. Actually, a little bird asked me if I could get you on to help let people know about AfriForum Youth. And that's what I want to talk about today. So before we go any further, greetings. Candid.
Thank you, Chris. No, it's going very well on this side. Well, under the circumstances, of course, always staying positive and hopeful. But as you know, we had to have this chat at an inconvenient time for you. But with the load shedding or the rolling blackouts, better known overseas, it's quite difficult to schedule something for the evening because if it's dark, then it's pitch dark and you wouldn't be able to see me. So at least we have a little bit of sunshine left this afternoon and we can at least see each other and have this conversation, which I'm looking forward to.
Well, I mean, next time we do this, if the power goes out, just, you know, use a satellite phone and have a braai going. That'll be the light we'll use to see you with.
That sounds nice as well.
Well, let's get into this in just a moment, but I've got a question here already from Courtney McBride. I'm going to read the question, and I'm not sure if it's fair for you to answer it, so you don't have to. I'll address it myself. But Courtney McBride, who's an American naval reservist who resides in Utah, which it resembles a lot of South Africa, very dry, very high, mountainous, high veld sort of thing. But he says, does AfriForum seek to create a Volksstaat that enables a government built upon traditional values, perhaps something akin to the Overijssel province in the Bijlbelt region of Holland? No, I don't think that that's the goal of AfriForum. They do have something recently that's going on where they're trying to teach people zelfbesturing. If I pronounce that correctly, that's something that they're trying to get people to be self-sufficient in light of the government failures. I don't know if that's something you want to touch on, Rene. I mean, I don't know if it's fair because we came to talk about AfriForum Youth, but do you want to address that or can you address that?
Yes, I can maybe just answer shortly and say that AfriForum's goal is definitely to get people to be less dependent or non-dependent on the state or on the government, and we can do that through the strength of communities, and that can happen in a lot of different ways. A folk state, as you mentioned, can be one in the future that some people envision, but practical solutions are more important at this moment where AfriForum focuses on the strength of communities in many different ways, where we try and live out our cultural values and try and live out our best lives, even though we are not in a folk state with borders, as some people would like to envision.
Well, Rene, you, of course, did your university and I believe your postgraduate studies focusing on Afrikaans culture and that sort of stuff. And I want to get into that a little bit. I don't know if you're aware, you might be. I don't know if you watch my content these days because you're pretty busy. But when I was in South Africa this time, I finally made a journey back to both Blood River and then Isandlwana and Rorke's. But of course, those really aren't things that interest Rorke's and Isandlwana aren't major topics for Afrikaner culture, but Blood River, of course, is, and Geloof de Dag and all that. So I was there and also made another visit to the Voortrekker Monument. The young man who was there, when we walked in, the gentleman who brought me there from Sightlanders, he started explaining to the young man who was the tour guide. He said, well, I'd like you to give him a tour. He goes, no, it's okay. I know who Colonel Wyatt is. this will be easy. So, but yeah, so I thought maybe as we get into this, if we have a little bit of time, we'll talk a little bit about those two locations, if you don't mind. But let's start off talking about AfriForum Youth. I mean, a lot of people know what AfriForum is. Many people don't understand correctly what it really is all about. It's a civil rights organization focused on Afrikaans and Afrikaners, but not exclusively, but that's its big focus. But a lot of people really don't understand it, but I'm sure that a lot of people really have no idea what AfriForum Youth is. Now, what is your role with AfriForum Youth? And then can you tell us a little bit about what it is so that we can enlighten folks?
Yes, so thank you for the little introduction as well for the few viewers that may not be familiar with AfriForum in the larger view. So as you mentioned, it is a civil rights organization, and with ongoing state failure in South Africa, it's very important to note that this is the largest civil rights organization in the Southern Hemisphere for a very specific reason. People need something to hold on to in this while state failure is happening all around us. And AfriForum Youth is the youth organization which forms part of AfriForum. And of course, our aims are also in line with what AfriForum's aims are. But specifically, we are looking at challenges that young Afrikaners are facing. So my job is more at the campaigns office. So we focus on the more activist type of activities where we advocate for the rights of young Afrikaners, and where we take on challenges or help them to take on challenges which they are confronted with each day. This goes from racial discrimination to maladministration by the government, which negatively impacts them. But then, of course, AfriForum Youth also has a large focus on the building front. So we have a saying, veg en bou, or fight and build. So the activist part that I mentioned is more the fighting part, to fight the injustice and to fight for young Afrikaners' rights. But the building part is also very important, where we try to build the cultural identity or the appreciation for your cultural identity with our young people, because many young people in South Africa are just faced by guilt tripping and all this negative publicity with their culture, trying to eradicate everything of our cultural heritage. So the building part is also very important, and this is to build their realization of their cultural identity up until doing social events where we can just enjoy ourselves and be ourselves with our unique cultural values in a safe environment.
Well, Rene, it's interesting because I find myself oftentimes on air, and especially in South Africa, talking to South Africans and Afrikaners in particular, and it's a bit shocking to me that I know their history far greater detail and greater understanding than many of them do, particularly those who are born frees. Because of, I'm not going to attribute this quote or this comment to you, but I'm going to use it. It's certainly cultural exclusion, if not cultural genocide, that's going on. If you're a South African and you're Tswana, Baralang, or Bakwena, you should be proud of who you are and not be ashamed of that. If you are a Zulu or Xhosa, there's no reason to be ashamed of who you are. You should be proud of your culture and venerate it, at least if it's something that doesn't harm someone else. And I think the same is true of the Afrikaners. They've forged a culture and a language in the tip of Africa, the southern tip of Africa, that didn't exist anywhere else. It's got some similarities to American pioneerism, but it's unique in its own right. And I'm just, I shouldn't say I'm shocked, Rene, because I know why, and you might explain why it's become that way in the past 30 years, but it's somewhat depressing to see Afrikaners who just become other people instead of being who they are, because the story of Afrikaners is quite an amazing one.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And I couldn't agree with you more when you said a Tswana person, for example, can also be proud of their culture. I always say I feel a lot closer to someone with a different skin color who actually has a animal skin Alice band around their head, and they celebrate that part of their culture. I feel closer to them than I feel to a person who maybe has the same skin color than me, but they just believe that there's one human race and culture is in the way of this this one global big dream. So it's very important to just emphasize that no matter what cultural group you belong to, I advocate that you be proud of that culture. And I just want people to also then accept and respect that I am proud of my culture. And the reason why so little people are aware of this, that what our cultural heritage really is, and that you can be proud of it, is that it is not taught in schools anymore. So this is very, very sad, but the handbooks at school now is like this one line of history that's being told that just has this one aim and this one message of the freedom struggle and Nelson Mandela, who is the hero. And of course, there's also a place to recognize that part of history, but it can't be exclusively that. So that is why it is so sad. And then, of course, parents don't necessarily tell their Afrikaner children about the history, because many of them might believe that they still learn it at school, or many of them might think that it's not necessary to teach them that because there's no future, which is very sad. But unfortunately, the political climate in the country is that way, that you don't necessarily feel safe to be proud of your culture. It's actually a very brave step to take if you want to say publicly that you're a proud Afrikaner.
No, absolutely. That is the case. Oftentimes just being that, you'll be portrayed or depicted in a fashion that has nothing to do with you as an individual, and probably nothing to do with your family. For instance, I mean, I don't know your family history, but your surname from birth evokes lots of memories of great, well-known Afrikaner or Boer leaders, like Paul Kruger. I don't know if you're related to him. It's a pretty common surname in South Africa. But I mean, you don't have to tell me if you are, but if you want to, you're welcome to. But I mean, a lot of kids today don't even know the history of their great-great-grandparents or great-grandparents, which isn't that far. I mean, I'm a generation removed from you, but I'm maybe two with this beard now. But my great-great-grandfathers fought in the American Civil War in the 1860s. And so for a lot of Afrikaners, we're talking about just their great-grandparents fighting in the Anglo-Boer War and what happened there. So, I mean, it's kind of sad to see that that kids aren't inculcated. Here in America, we have the Amish and the Mennonites, and we have the old Spanish families of New Mexico and South Texas and parts of California. And they've retained their cultural distinctiveness for 3 and 4 centuries, these families. I mean, the Amish still speak German. It's a funny German because it's 400 years old, but it is German. I just have to listen very carefully when I talk to them in German. What are your thoughts? I mean, is it frustrating to see that families don't inculcate their youth about their history? Because I think it's important to know where you come from. I had to rediscover it myself.
Yes, definitely, Chris. So I'll start with President Paul Kruger, as you would pronounce it. I always wanted to believe that I'm family. I am a descendant from Paul Kruger, but upon investigation, I couldn't find anything, and then I stopped so that I don't dig too deep and know for sure that I'm not. So now there's this maybe not.
It's a gray area now, and you want to leave it gray. Okay, well, that's interesting.
Yeah. But yes, it's definitely frustrating and sad that families don't do the effort everywhere. At least there's definitely, I think, a turnaround at the moment. I think there's from 10 years back until now, I think there's actually more people that realize the importance of it, and Afrikaners specifically, and then also young people who realize the importance of it and try and go and find out for themselves. So yeah, I think it is very, very important, and that is also something that AfriForum Youth aims to do. The content I create always has this underlying theme of telling young Afrikaners who they are, what is our cultural heritage, why we can be proud of it, what is AfriForum's views on topical issues. So that's also a part of what AfriForum Youth does and what we focus on. And I think it's a huge gap to fill, but I think we are doing all right. And I like the results we're seeing as soon as people start to realize they can actually be proud of their cultural heritage. They just become such more strong individuals.
Well, I think it's very important. I agree. I think it should be important. I mean, a lot of people abroad, outside South Africa, when they think of South Africans, if they even know who Afrikaners are, think of Afrikaners, the things that spring to mind, of course, are braai, Springboks, and apartheid. That's probably the only three things that come to mind for them. And sadly, I see some South Africans, Afrikaans speaking South Africans, that's sort of becoming their worldview, because there's been a gap the past 30 years where I think the parents haven't done what they should do in inculcating their youth. Look, I mean, as I said, my history is, look, not me personally, although some people think I'm very interesting, but I don't know that I am. But my family history is incredibly fascinating, as is everybody's if you take a look at it. But I knew none of that. I had to learn all that as an adult and go back and research as a researcher and genealogist and find out the very fascinating stories, including some stories that are not politically correct and bad things that, family members did to each other, that sort of thing. But I think it's important to know who you are and where you come from, not because it defines who you are now, but because it's part of how you got here and how your people, your folk, got to where they are now. There's a reason why the Tswana people are cattle herders for the most part. There's a reason that happened. There's a reason that they formed the bands that they have. And it's the same thing with the Afrikaners, who aren't simply Dutch who settled in the Cape. They're Dutch, they're German, they're Huguenots, some Khoi and San mixed in there as well, and some Malay. They're a mix of peoples who formed a culture and a language in the crucible of conflict, discovery, and adventure in Southern Africa. That sounds like an advert for a new movie.
It does sound good.
So I mean, it's. I think that I agree with you. It's very important. Let me go back to the point you talked about a few moments ago, and that was you were talking about in Afrikaans about. I think you were about teaching or educating and building. You pronounce it differently than I would, because I pronounce it German. I'd say bau, but I think you said boo or something like that. But let's go with the education part. It seems to be very important because, as we discussed a moment ago, it's not really, and you mentioned, it's not really taught in schools anymore, the history of the country. And it's, and it's not just Afrikaners' history that's not being taught properly. It's the history of the Tswana people, the Basotho people, the true history of the Zulus and the Xhosa. It's not being taught properly in South African schools. And that makes me heart sore, because South Africans should know their history.
Yes, Chris, definitely. So if I can tell you a little bit more about the building part, as you mentioned, yes, it can also be described as a developmental role to help develop young people, and that empowers them. Of course, if you know what your cultural heritage is and where you come from, you can know where you are going, and that is very empowering. So this manifests in many different ways, which AfriForum Youth takes on, whether it might be a hiking tour that's actually a very cool example. There's this hiking tour, which this the sir, he tells the story. He's a very, very well read about the history of Afrikaners, and he would lead this hiking tour, and this hiking tour would physically go over the places where the Anglo-Boer War happened, and he will tell you the stories that happened there, and it is so enriching to learn about it there while you are physically standing at the same spot where General Koos de la Rey was, or whoever. So that is one example of a developmental role where I felt empowered. Even me, who actually know a little bit more about history than the average person, I felt empowered after that hiking tour. And then it can also be something like a social event, for example, a sokkie, the traditional Afrikaner dance.
Kalfoot sokkie.
Yes. Kalfoot sokkie, to dance barefoot, very nice. And of course, that was something that was very it was all over. You could maybe take part in that. Now it's not that all over anymore at university campuses, and young people can now visit an AfriForum Youth social event where they can dance, and it's something as simple as that. It sounds stupid, but just to actually take part in that cultural tradition of dancing, you can discover something. You can discover a little bit of pride for your culture, and a little bit of nostalgia to find out more about your culture and your cultural heritage.
No, I don't think it sounds silly or stupid at all. I mean, I of course attend multiple universities, but I remember as an undergraduate at Ohio University, we'd have lots of things on campus. I mean, university is supposed to be a place for universal ideas, right? I mean, that's the idea. It's the theory. Of course, you wouldn't know that in America with people trying to cancel people, but there would be a lot of events on campus, introduced to a lot of different cultural things, particularly from Asia and from Africa and the Middle East. But I didn't see a lot of people focusing on having bluegrass festivals or having square dances and things like that. These are American cultural things, and and I didn't know them. I didn't do square dancing as a kid, and I heard of bluegrass, but I didn't know. But that's American too, and that culture should have been represented on campus as well. So I think that a lot of times countries can be reticent or more likely negligent in promoting their own culture to their own youth, and I think that's important to understand. You were talking about some of the challenges that Afrikaner youth face. Now, I would presume, and you can correct me if I get these wrong, that some of those would be, racist policies about employment, particularly in government sector, barriers put up to entrepreneurialism, to Afrikaners, particular idiotic things like the Tourism Relief Fund during COVID, which banned money going to people if they didn't have the right skin pigmentation. Talk about racist laws, upheld by the North Gauteng High Court, by the way. Unbelievable. Eventually, I believe, overturned, if I'm not mistaken, by the Supreme Court appeal. But anyway, so I assume that would be one of the challenge, or a couple of the challenges. Entrance into university. Are these some of the challenges? And then just what we've been covering here is just the lost culture that people don't know about. Are those accurate descriptions of some of the challenges? Or are there more that I'm not aware of?
No, that is definitely, Chris, and underlying all of this is obviously a feeling of hopelessness. I mean, how discouraged should you be if you have the best marks in your class and you get denied admission to study the course that you really want to, just because they blatantly tell you, sorry, only people with a black skin color will be admitted to study this course. That discouragement and that disappointment, you work so hard, you maybe even have the passion in your heart to serve your community, serve your country, if you want to go and study medicine and become a doctor and help people, but you are just being told, no, sorry, you don't have the right skin color, we don't want you to help us, to help the country. Now you can't get a job after that, you can't get a bursary to study, and then there's just this hopelessness and people who want to emigrate. So that's definitely underlying all of these challenges. But to get more into the challenges that you mentioned, is definitely true what you said, Chris. The racial discrimination is definitely the one we are being confronted with the most. The inquiries we get from young people, the examples we hear from the ways there's racial discrimination against them is really shocking. And then you mentioned that it's especially in the government sector. And unfortunately, as you are aware, the new Employment Equity Act is so severe that it will actually, there's already laws in place to force even the private sector to comply with this racist policies, to say, well, sorry, that 51% of your business shares should just be handed over to someone with a different skin color than you, and that's just the way it is, no questions asked. So definitely that kind of hinderness you face everywhere, whether it is you apply for a bursary, whether you apply to go and study a specific course, whether you apply for a job, whether you try out for a sports team. So that one is very important. And then also just maladministration and corruption by the government, which also negatively impacts young people. There's a lot of examples, but just for example, the UNISA, the University of South Africa, that was once highly recommended and recognized overseas. There is now talks going on about to place UNISA under administration, and things are so bad there. There's like hundreds of students who completed their course or their degree, but they just don't get any correspondence with regards to whether they will receive their certificate, their qualification. So they can't apply for jobs. Their life is just like put on a standstill. So that's also one. And then, of course, we are also involved with student life and student rights on campuses specifically. So this varies from mother tongue language that we advocate for at our university campuses up until to promote and save, or what do you call it, nourish.
Preserve, nourish it?
Yes.
Nourish? Okay.
Thank you, Chris, to preserve the traditions as well, because if you hear the traditions they take away, Chris, with the reasons they give for it, it's shocking. I mean, it's all done in the name of transformation and to be inclusive, but they're just excluding people left, right, and center, and they're just taking away all of these traditions, everything that gives meaning to being in a residence on campus. So it is it's really sad, but we are involved with all of that good fights.
Well, that's interesting that the AfriForum is focused on those sorts of things, because I think someone needs to focus on it. And doing it at an individual level, you can only leverage so much influence and change as an individual. Working together as a community oftentimes gets greater results. On a personal note, I'd address something here very quickly. One of my viewers is crushing on you. I'm sorry, she's spoken for. You've missed your window. You've missed your window, young man. So I'm sorry, but someone's crushing on you. But on a personal level, that's why I brought that up. You've been subjected to some pretty horrific, vile, racist, disgusting personal attacks on Twitter, particularly on Twitter and other places, simply for stating factual information, not attacking. I've never seen you attack any other ethnic group ever. I mean, if you've done it, you're doing it very surreptitiously, because I've never seen it. But I mean, you seem like a person very comfortable in your own skin. And I'm not talking about skin pigmentation. I'm talking about inside who you are. Where does that come from, Rene? Does that come from a good upbringing? Did you have strong parents and siblings that got you? Was faith part of it? What made you seem like a resolute person? And we've met in person. So it's not like I'm just saying this through electrons. We've met in person. Where does it come from? And do you feel like a strong person? Because you put up with a lot of crap.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the compliments. And yes, I would say faith is definitely the number one part of it. I mean, as a Christian, I believe that God created me who I am, and He placed me where I am. He has a plan with me, and everything in my life goes according to His will. That is what my prayer is every day. So yes, and then of course, to sum it all up, I always say that the safest place you can be is in God's will. So I always check in with Him before I say something or do something. So if you refer to that specific tweet that went viral due to ugly comments that I received, it was also, as you say, it was not attacking anyone. I said something that I feel confident about, our culture, and actually the whole tweet was about this beautiful cattle my grandfather has. And then when I received all these ugly comments, it is upsetting, but I never feel unsafe, because as I say, the safest place you can be is in God's will, and I trust that is in His will, that you, whether you are what cultural group, however, be comfortable in who you are and be confident in who He created you to be, where He has placed you. So yes, and I think I will never bite on the whole lie of white guilt or white privilege or whatever, because privilege is actually a very sad word that's being swung around in this world. Because privilege, yes, I am privileged because everything I have comes out of God's hand, and it's a privilege. Nothing is a right. I don't have a right to anything. So yes, I am privileged as a child of God, but not because of my skin color. So if that answers your question. And then I can quickly just mention, yes, my family. I love my family very much. I trust I do have strong parents, or they at least raised me and my two sisters to be very strong.
Wait, I got to interrupt you for a second. Two sisters. Are they still available for the guy crushing? Just I had to ask for my viewers.
There's one of them that's available, but
okay, well, there you go. Now look at my face. It looks like I'm getting all red now. No. All right, so that's now you got people smiling in the chat. That's anyway. Excuse me a second. I'm all choked up on that, but no, thank you for sharing that. That's, I mean, it's important for people to understand where that comes from. You know, a lot of people have been destroyed by the nonsensical personal attacks. We saw a lot during the lockdown. I saw people who came on YouTube and were just destroyed by trolls and their lives upended. Other people attacking people with malicious lies and slander and things. And it's difficult, but that's why I wanted to ask you where it comes from. I presumed that faith played a strong role in it, and that was the first thing you led with, and of course your family. So that makes sense. It's good to have that support system. And you know, you talk about this white liberal guilt. It's a ridiculous fantasy. People who have white liberal guilt are ignorant, stupid, and foolish because they don't understand how the world works, or they don't care, or they've come from this so-called privilege and they presume that because someone has the same skin color as them, they've lived in the same world. I mean, I grew up at a time in my youth without electricity. You know, I talked to Dr. Peter Groenewald when I interview him. He didn't have electricity growing up. I mean, of course, he's a bit older than me, but, you know, but he didn't have electricity growing up. People presume a lot of things. I had to go to university on state aid. I was completely broke. I had no money whatsoever and got in not because of my skin color. In fact, I was a slightly above average student in high school because I was busy milking cows every morning and every night and not focused on studies. So I didn't get an academic prowess. I was qualified, but I didn't get an academic prowess. I didn't get a skin color. I didn't get on family connections. I got in because I met the standards and I was poor. So I was able to raise the money from, you know, government sources, as you would call them, bursaries and such. But it's very frustrating to listen to these people who, you know, because someone looks a certain way, they presume certain things about them. I feel no guilt whatsoever about what I have and don't have. Everything I have, I've earned. I've worked my way through life, and I'm not going to say I deserve it, but certainly it's there because of the effort that I put in. And oftentimes that's effort involved with a team. You know, in the military, you work with a team. But the point is here, no one handed me anything, and certainly not based on my skin color. And I suspect that you haven't been handed anything either, other than perhaps a wonderful upbringing by your family.
Yes, Chris, that is correct. And yes, unfortunately, I love a farm very much, but unfortunately, I won't inherit a farm, neither me or my husband, even though our dream would be to farm one day. So just to put it out there for people who just think that everything falls in our lap, it will upset me very much if we one day reach our goal to buy a little piece of land of our own and people would then say, yeah, but you stole the land. That would be very upsetting. Even now already it's upsetting. I actually just today saw a meme. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's South Africans Afrikaners specifically deal with heavy stuff through humor, that is for sure. And today I saw a thing, an advert, someone wants to sell their white privilege card, and then they say they have had it, apparently they've had it for 50 years, but they could never figure out how it works. They could never receive free education or free hospital or free anything. So this thing doesn't work. They want to sell it and want to buy a victim card in return because the victim card gets you everything. So that was quite a good one for me, and I think that sums it up. That's also the reason why I won't feel guilty about anything. I work for everything I have. My parents are unfortunately not very rich people, but they raised me and they love me, and I work for everything I have. I also had to work my way through university with good marks that could give me a chance on a merit bursary. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. I agree 100%. You know, it's in Zimbabwe, when the nonsense started in 2000, I refuted the nonsense. Of course, I was an intelligence officer, and so I wasn't speaking to the public, but just to leadership and political circles and military. But I refuted it. I said, look, you have to understand that this is just nonsense. Mugabe's talking about kith and kin and the white settler comes in 1890. That's nonsense. Yes, Zimbabwe was partitioned and divided, this, that, and the other, but there's a lot more to the story. And specifically that the bulk of people in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, who were white, came there after 1945, after the Second World War ended, over half the population. And 38% of those who were landowners and 42% of all the land designated as commercial farmland in the year 2000 when they began invading farms have been approved for sale, not by Ian Smith's government, but by Robert Gabriel Mugabe's government. They had approved the sale to these people. So if they had cared about veterans from ZAPU and ZANU, the ZANLU and ZIPRA and ZANLA, the armies of those guerrilla groups, if they cared about them, They had all the opportunity in the world to get farmland and turn it over to them. If they cared about poor black Zimbabweans, they had the opportunity to acquire 42% of all commercial farmland between 1980 and 2000. That's pretty impressive. Half the farmland in the country could have been acquired legally by the government and distributed if they cared in a 20-year period, but it wasn't. The money that the Brits gave them, 63 million pounds, was used to buy farms for Mugabe, for Mnangagwa, for Constantine Chiwengo, for Sherence Piri, for all these slimy, nasty people. And then they just try to play the race game. And that's the same thing that's happening in South Africa. We see it all the time, particularly on the farm. I don't know if you saw this story, sad one. Hopefully it won't be tragic news, but it is sad that it happened. Former Springbok hooker Lucas van Biljon was attacked on his Free State farm over the weekend. They tied his children up with cable ties and threatened that they would shoot them if he resisted. I guess he must have done something at some point. They stabbed him repeatedly. I don't know the number of times. It's being bandied about in social media. He was stabbed 80 times. I don't know, but he was stabbed repeatedly. His father, Andre, who's 70 years old, tried to radio for help to the farm patrol watch, and they shot him 3 times, twice in the chest and once in the hand, if I'm not mistaken. He's in critical condition in the hospital. There's been no update on Lucas, former Springbok player. This can happen to anybody at any time and anywhere. And it's really frightening to see how people use race as the way to legitimize or to ignore this sort of thing. And before anyone goes any further, before you respond, Rene, I'm going to be very clear about this because I've always been clear about this. You know, people running around saying white genocide. Now, I don't say that. I do say cultural genocide because there's an effort to stamp out Afrikaans and Afrikaans culture. I believe that's true. But it's rural insecurity. It's a consequence of the government's malfeasance, its incompetence, its culpability. And it affects black, white, brown South Africans, all South Africans, not just white Afrikaners. But in particular, they have become prime targets in rural areas because the presumption that they have money or the fact that they have weapons or cash to pay their staff and such. I don't know. Did you see that story about what happened to Lucas?
Yeah, I did see it. I looked at it briefly, Chris. It's very upsetting to me. So, as I say, I just looked at it briefly, and unfortunately, my sister actually just asked me this past weekend whether the farmer tax has been declining or been becoming less.
Less frequent.
Less frequent because she hasn't seen something in the media for a very long time. And unfortunately, it has not been declining. It's just been reported on less in the media because it's not sensational anymore. It's not really shocking anymore because it happens very frequently. So that is very, very sad.
No, absolutely. Well, let's get back to AfriForum Youth here a little bit. So I'm not a member of AfriForum, and the reason for that, although I like what they do personally, and I support what they try to do to help South Africans, all South Africans trying to help. But I stay not a member so that I retain my independence as a journalist. But I'm subscribed and get the newsletters in English and Afrikaans, and I struggle through the Afrikaans and I get through the English pretty quickly. but they send regular newsletters out to folks. Are you doing that with AfriForum Youth as well? Is that one way you reach? I know that you, and we should talk about this, you've got an AfriForum Youth channel, if I'm not mistaken, on YouTube. Is that correct? And you do videos.
Yes.
And you do videos.
Yes.
I saw a couple. It almost looks like you're like, now this isn't a compliment or a dig. But I get the set. It's almost like a Martha Stewart video. You're there explaining some Afrikaans cultural things. Is that kind of a series or what's going on there?
So it's not just me on the channel. It's just been this recent video series that's so my face appears a lot at the moment on AfriForum Youth's YouTube channel, but there will be videos from different people and different activities that we take part in. But the one that I think you are referring to is braai broodjies en belasting.
That's it, braai broodjies. Yeah, I've had those. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's actually just an information video text that's broken up in little pieces, which actually just exposes the ridiculousness of the high taxes that we pay in South Africa and the way that it's being spent and the way that we don't receive any state service for all the high taxes. And just to make it more relatable or to make it more interesting for viewers, we kind of combined it with me making braai broodjies while talking about taxes. So it's not a series, unfortunately, on Afrikaner culture in the whole, but just specifically braai broodjies and taxes.
Okay, well let's just be honest about this. Okay, all right. Look, I was at a braai in South Africa, not too far from. I can never pronounce it correctly. It's the place where the English forced the peace treaty of Vereniging. How do you pronounce that?
Vereniging, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Close enough. That's a nice job. You did a nice job pronouncing that. Yeah. No, but no, I was at a braai near there with a friend who's a singer, and we had some braai boikies. Let's just be honest. Come on, it's just a grilled cheese sandwich thrown on top of a cooking fire, right?
No, definitely not, Chris. I don't know who made the braai broodjies, but maybe they didn't make it the right traditional way.
I'm just teasing. It was made the right way. It was a window for you to tell people what a braai broodjie is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, should I tell them now, or should
please
they
tell them now? Because I think the Afrikaans speakers obviously know what it is, but we have Americans and folks from Australia and UK and other places watching right now. So go ahead and let them know what it is.
Yes, well, you won't understand until you taste it, but it is a braai broodjie. You should butter it on both sides, and then it gets cheese, tomato, chutney, which is also traditionally in South Africa, and onions, and then you salt and pepper a little bit, and then you put it on the braai, and then it's just amazing, the combination. But you can't do it any other way. The traditional way is the only way. You can't say, no, you don't want onions, no, you don't want chutney. It should be the traditional way, and that's the only way.
Well, I think I've just lost some subscribers. I got one here who said, what did he say? He said, grilled cheese sandwich, unsub in all caps. Relax, folks, relax. Braai boikies are quite tasty anyway, but minus the onions. I can't deal with the onions. That's a deal breaker. I'm sorry. I got to tell you that now. If I ever get back down that way and we do a braai, there's no onions, or I'll pass on them.
You know, Chris, then one of the puns that I said in the braai broodjies and belasting videos was that if you cut off the corner of the braai broodjie, now for example, we'll cut off the corner of your braai broodjie because you have a fimi, you have a you don't want it the traditional way, so we'll cut off the corner of the braai broodjie, and then that is also known as the national symbol of someone that's full of nonsense.
Oh, shots fired, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed this final appearance of Rene Vyver on the program. She'll never be back on the channel after this. I have a very thin skin and can't take any insults. That's funny. That I didn't know. That might explain another braai that I was at. What was going on? Just kidding. Oh my goodness. So listen, I mean, is AfriForum Youth? Is it a long existing thing? Has it been around since the inception, or is it something recent? It's not like the ANC Youth League or the DAs, because those are political parties. I mean, is it like a club? I mean, how do people get involved?
Yes, so it started shortly after AfriForum was introduced to the public, and you can probably call it a club if you want to, but you can become a member by just saying that you want to become a member. And then there's that is also important. So I tackle the national campaigns of AfriForum, AfriForum Youth. So I get inquiries from people all over South Africa, young people with challenges they face, and we tackle this national campaigns or this national issues. But then a very important part of AfriForum Youth is also that they have branches physically on campus or in towns now. In different towns we have branches, and there you can literally walk in and become part and take part in whatever AfriForum Youth is doing there in your environment. But then you are also just part of AfriForum nationally if you become part of AfriForum Youth in a in a branch manner. And yes, if you are not aware of a branch, AfriForum Youth branch in your environment, you can contact us and start one, and we'll help you to start the AfriForum Youth branch in your town. And otherwise you can become part by joining us on that hiking tour I mentioned, or you can join us by just saying on the website that you want to become a member, and then you will be added to the group and updated on what activities we are taking part in. And yes, we're not a political party, as you mentioned. We are not necessarily a club, but we are a youth organization which advocate for the rights of young Afrikaners and also have fun together with other young Afrikaners.
Well, that raises yet another question here. You know, I'm not a big fan of Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA because they don't listen to anybody that's over 28, even though they're older than 28 themselves. So at what point do you progress to where you're just an old Tani or an and you can't be part of AfriForum Youth? Is there a cutoff date, or can I join if I shave my beard and put some grease and foam in my hair?
If you are comfortable with lying, Chris, but unfortunately, the cutoff at this moment I think is 35. So it's a good gap that one have to be part of AfriForum Youth. But then of course you can support AfriForum Youth by following what we do and supporting what we do, even though you're not a youth member. But of course, the great part of it will be if you are an AfriForum Youth member, and when you're too old to be an AfriForum Youth member, you become an AfriForum member and help stand together with the other more than 310,000 members who wants to make a difference in South Africa.
Now, that raises another question for those who are youthful, young, and might be interested under the age of 35, age discrimination, might be interested under the age of 35 in joining AfriForum Youth. Do you have someone that organizes or works with Afrikaner youth from around the world who might want to form a branch or local organization, say in Wellington, New Zealand, or in Namibia or Botswana?
That's a very good question, Chris. There's not AfriForum Youth branches overseas at the moment. I think it can be something to be discussed, because AfriForum's view is definitely that we want to help fight and build for a future for young Afrikaners here in South Africa. So we're not focusing too much on overseas, but there is AfriForum Wêreldwyd or AfriForum Worldwide that does that to help connect people, Afrikaners overseas, with AfriForum and what AfriForum is doing. And of course, there is no age discrimination. Even if you are a youth member, you can follow what AfriForum Worldwide is doing.
And see, that's where I always get tripped up with Afrikaans in German, because I speak German. So, you know, AfriForum Worldwide, Weltweit, it's Weltweit in German. So it's so close, but not quite the same. Listen, this is a question back to one of my viewers who has come to hide out in America now. He's come over here. He's a pilot. So he's over here now. So we give him a lot of grief. But he said being able to make a proper braai should be a legal requirement before marriage. Now, I'm going to say, what, for the fellow or for the lady? Are you being misogynist there? Who has to make the braai? Is it the man or the woman? And what do you chuckled at that, but I mean, I suppose it's kind of important in Afrikaans marriage to have that ability to do that. It's like, you know, if you can't start a proper braai, you're probably not marriageable.
Yes. Well, for me, that's definitely true. Other people may differ from me, but there's this popular show, Afrikaans show, Boer Soek 'n Vrou. I don't know if you know it. Farmer wants a wife, and one of the farmers once said that he won't kiss a girl before she makes him a good braaibroodjie. He won't. He just refuses. So there's definitely a requirement by many Afrikaners, especially farmers, that their wives should be able to make a good braaibroodjie. But just as I have a requirement that my husband should be able to braai my steak and my skaap choppie, my lamb, just the way I like it. So important, I would say.
All right, so it's not just a requirement. Well, presume that what he meant was a requirement for the Burmese to be able to make the braai. So, okay. But let me ask you this question. What's something that people outside the United States, or outside the United States, outside South Africa, excuse me, people outside South Africa might not know about Afrikaans culture or language that they might find interesting? I mean, at times I have to step back and remember that I am familiar with things more than the average person. So is there something that you could think of that maybe people don't understand about Afrikaners or Afrikaans that maybe we should know about? That's a tough question. I just threw it out there. I didn't give you a chance to prepare for it.
Yes, no, I think there's two things that I would mention. Maybe it's too simple for your viewers that might be up to date as you are. But firstly, I would say at AfriForum also we focus on pronouncing it the right way, that there is an Afrikaans language community and then there's an Afrikaner cultural community. So there is a difference because, of course, there's a lot of people with different cultures who speaks Afrikaans in South Africa. And so we don't talk about Afrikaans culture, we talk about Afrikaner culture. That's more like a specific cultural group. No cultural group can be homogeneous in total, but Afrikaner cultural group and Afrikaans language group. And then my favorite part is to say that our history in South Africa starts like 371 years ago. So that's also always an important thing for me to emphasize, because with all the lies going on about land being stolen or about Afrikaners who don't belong here, who should be chasing to the sea, who should go back to Europe. That is so our history here dates
sort of
back
racist.
very far. Yes, and yes, of course, our footprints lie here. All that our forefathers built is still here. So that is the important thing, I would say.
No, I think those are great points, and thank you for sharing those. Well, before we wrap up, we've got a couple more minutes here before we let you go and you run out of power there, courtesy of Eskom. It does such a great job delivering electricity in South Africa. But before we go, I just wanted to, ask you how things are going. We haven't chatted in a while. Since I think the last time you were on, you had already gotten hitched. You were already married last time you were on, but they were recently married, if I'm not mistaken. So now you got a few more days and weeks under your belt there. How's life? How are things going? If it's not too personal, people are curious about how you're doing.
Yes, so I'm doing very well. I think the most exciting part or news in my life is that we have three Jack Russell Terriers. And maybe this is also interesting for your viewers, Chris, because their names, this can be a hint. So this can be a tip for people all around the world who wants to, preserve their cultural heritage. Give your dogs culturally rich names. So so my one dog is called Sanna, and she's named after Susanna Smith, who was the voortrekker woman who said she would rather walk barefoot over the Drakensberge mountains than live under British rule. So our one Jack Russell is Sanna, and our other Jack Russell is Leonie. She is named after Leni Retief, the wife of the voortrekker leader Piet Retief. And of course, Leni Retief was also, what was admirable about her was that she lost 9 children during the Great Trek, and still afterwards she wrote a letter to her brother in the Cape to say he must send her some seeds to plant trees because she wants to plant in the new land. She still had that hope and that pride in the new open land that they found. And then our new baby, he's a boy now, Koos, is named after General Koos de la Rey.
Of course, yes.
Yes, so of course that is very nice to talk about my pets, because I always get the opportunity to give a little history lesson. But that's exciting news, and we've been living in Port Elizabeth for the last year and a half since we've been married, down at the coast in the Eastern Cape, and we enjoyed it very much with our Jack Russells, of course, to go for long walks down the beach. Of course, this is very important for one's well-being in South Africa, because if you are confronted with all the injustices and the load shedding and the state failure, everything going on around you, then nature is the best place to be in our country. And yes, we'll be moving soon up north in the country. My husband got a new job that's more in his interest with agriculture, so we are excited about that. And that will mean that we'll be moving closer to Pretoria, and for people who needs that reference, and that will be happening soon.
Oh,
I think that's a
that's
good
pretty
summary.
cool. Nice summary there. I suppose it'd be much easier for me to see the two of you because I get to Gauteng all the time. Eastern Cape is a bridge too far, and besides, if I go there, I feel obliged to visit Ronaldo, and that's never fun.
Yeah, I understand.
Just kidding. We had to get a dig in on Ronaldo before the program's over. But before we wrap up, let me go back to the Blood River thing and the Fort Trucker Monument. Now, the organization that maintains both of these, one group maintains both now. It's done by private trust, if I'm not mistaken. It was interesting for me. I had, of course, been to Blood River previously. I see that the road out there is still not paved. It's still gravel after all these years. But I went out there, and quite a lovely experience. They finished that Friendship Bridge since the last time I was there. That's how long ago it had been. There had not been a bridge across the Nkome River there. Now there is. But I wanted to go see the Zulu display, and there was nobody there. It was business hours, and nobody was there. There were folks working on the Afrikaner side, but the Trekboer side. But that's a fascinating place to visit from a Zulu historical perspective, and also from an Afrikaner perspective. I presume that you've been there at least once in your life, and if so, what was it like for you if you've been there?
Chris, I'm so ashamed to say that I will only be
you've never been? Oh my gosh. Did I just put you on the spot? I feel so bad.
Yeah. No, it's fine. Definitely on my bucket list to go there. It's also a good point to emphasize actually just how big South Africa as a country is. Because growing up in the Western Cape, of course, KwaZulu-Natal, where the Blood River Museum is very far away, and unfortunately never had the chance to go there before, but we will be going this year. And but the Fort Trucker Monument, you can ask me anytime. I've been there a few times and love it very much. But about the Blood River, of course, the reason I want to go is that it must be fascinating. I'm looking forward to seeing and experiencing. And I don't know if there was something specifically that you wanted to ask about it, Chris. Maybe I can still give an answer even though I wasn't there before.
No, it's fine. I'm sorry to put you on the spotlight. I shouldn't have presumed that you'd been there. That was unfair. You're right. South Africa is a huge country. Everyone wants me to come everywhere in South Africa, and it's simply not possible. I mean, I haven't put a foot in Mpumalanga and Limpopo these last two trips because it's too much. I did get to the Northern Cape, which is the first time I've actually been there, and I got to Northwest, which I get to frequently because I used to live in Botswana. But yeah, no, and even if you live in KZN, getting to Blood River is a challenge in and of itself. It's a bit of a hike out there. Now, what I want to say about it and ask you about is that the Battle of Blood River was a seminal event in the history of the formation of the Afrikaner political identity, not just cultural, but political identity. Some of that was misused by governments later on, but it played a seminal role. Do you think, because you studied this culture when you were at university, do you think that battle still plays a role in some sense for the Afrikaner people? Is it something that matters? I know to people older than me, it certainly matters, but is it still important in Afrikaner culture, Blood River?
Yes, I think so, definitely, Chris. It was a covenant that was laid off, and it's a good. I was a speaker at a Gelofte Dag festival the past year. So the Covenant Day, which is the day that they remember the Blood River. And it was great to see people coming together, children learning about the history. And I was the speaker there, and I had the chance to talk about, touch down on what happened in the history, but to take it through to make it relevant today. And I think that is so important. So you don't have to get stuck in the actual war and fight and so on, but to just focus on the fact that our forefathers relied solely on God's grace, and that we should do that today still, and that we should remember that He planted us here. Not only was it a miracle in 1652, but that miracle was also confirmed then in 1835. 1838 with Blood River, and yes, to remember that is important, and I think it's the one chance that we still have in South Africa, with that being a holiday, a public holiday, to actually make an effort to tell our children a little bit about our heritage. And as I mentioned, it doesn't have to be about the war or the fights. It can just be a chance to also talk about our heritage and the fact that God planted us here and led us here in South Africa.
Well, speaking of heritage and learning about it, the Four Tracker Monument itself in Pretoria, which overlooks Pretoria from the southwest side of the city, has quite an impressive view, and quite an interesting thing where the sun comes into the center of that. That is whether people understand the history or why it's there, or if they agree with it politically or not, you have to be impressed by the sheer impressiveness of it. It's quite an impressive monument. The frieze inside, not frozen in the freezer, folks, but the frieze, the French word for the depictions in stone along the wall, telling the history of the Four Trackers, meeting with Ngane, the treaty, Piet Retief, the list goes on and on. Of course, Blaukrans and Wienen and all of that. It's all on there. It's an incredible monument, and whether you have an affinity for Afrikaners and truck boards or not, I think that's something that all people should take a look at. I think it's an easier one to say that still has a big imprint on Afrikaner culture and still is important today. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. Of course, there's also, with the country being so big, a lot of people who haven't been there, a lot of Afrikaners who haven't been there, and I think reading about it or knowing about it isn't the same than experiencing it when you are there. Definitely, yeah, it's definitely an experience to be there. And sorry, Chris, am I becoming darker and darker, because I see the lights is becoming less and my phone is going darker? So can you still see me?
I can see you just fine. I don't know if your battery's running low. Maybe that's what it is. But we're about to wrap up anyway, because it's been an hour. But go ahead and please finish that before the phone dies.
Yeah. Yes, no, so definitely I think it would make an impression on anyone who is there, and it's still a place where you can at least go and talk about the heritage, learn about the heritage. And recently they also, on the same grounds of the Four Tracker Monument, I know there's a lot of things going on there since the Solidarity movement also became involved in a way. There's a lot of things going on. They're talking about new monuments or new events that they will be holding or hosting there, and new centrums like the Heritage Centrum, where there's more what do you call it, archaeological stuff that you can view. So yeah, a lot of things going on there, and I think it's a whole day trip to go there. And it's not only for Afrikaner people. I know there's a lot of people from other cultural groups in South Africa, like Zulu people, who go there to also see something about their history. It's a way that they can learn about that as well.
And I understand recently a friend of mine did another concert there, and tens of thousands showed up. I'm talking about Steve Hofmeyer. He apparently had a huge crowd once again at the Four Tracker Monument for his concerts. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to meet Steve, or if you've ever been to one of his concerts, but what an electrifying performer. What a really great guy.
Yes. I've met him over the phone, not in person yet, but I definitely went to one of his shows before, and I agree with that word you used, electrifying.
Well, maybe we can rectify that sometime once you guys have moved up to Gauteng. Maybe I can do an introduction for you and your husband. No promises. I'll see what I can do if you're interested in meeting Steve Hofmeyer.
Yes, that sounds good, Chris. I would enjoy that.
See, that's what I do. I bring South Africans together. Anyway, Rene, it's as always a distinct pleasure. And as always, after the fact, I think you realize that you have a lot to contribute and there's a lot of things we can ask about to share with people. So next time when I ask for you to come on, don't say, well, what could I possibly talk about? There's always something to talk about. So thank you, Baya Donkey, for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think the viewers did. And I'll state this up front right now. The gentleman who was crushing earlier, whose heart I broke, if you send me a super chat, a big super chat, I'll weasel her sister's number out of her, okay? And I'll share it with you. I'm just saying, the one that's available. Anyway. But Rene, any final words you'd like to say about AfriForum Youth or about South Africa or anything just with the audience before you drop off? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. I think it's important to always end off with on a positive note. So just for the people out there who sees the news and everything that's going on in South Africa and think that everyone here is hopeless and discouraged, we are not. We are still fighting the good fight, and to be part of AfriForum and people who actively makes practical solutions possible for the problems we're facing. It's encouraging rather than discouraging. It's very encouraging to become less dependent on the government. Still a lesson that other countries will learn in the future. And yes, so that gives us hope, and we will keep on to fight the good fight.
Well, that's a very encouraging statement there at the end, Rene. Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and put you in the waiting room. If you can hang around for a moment, I'll close up and I'll come right back to you if you can just wait for a moment, okay? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye. All right, folks, that's Rene van der Vyver. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me put her into the waiting room so that she's... What's going on here? Oh, there we go. Okay, here we go. I'll put her in the waiting room, and I'll be with her in just a moment. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. We'll be back for the news in an hour and a half on Chris Wyatt Reports. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did. And my thanks to my guest, Rene van der Vyver, who was very informative and very helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and have a lovely day. Hopefully we'll see you back for the news here shortly. I'll be back in about 90 minutes for Chris Wyatt Reports. Lots of news today. Thanks a lot, folks. Cheers. And thanks to my guest.